So today we're going to talk about the basics of framing. And I want to start out really by asking a question, what makes a filmmaker a storyteller? And it kind of seems obvious, but it's a little hard to define, right? I mean, we understand what the writer does. The writer writes the plot, the dialogue, all that stuff. But what does a director or cinematographer really do? Like, why we say they're a storyteller, how are they a storyteller, right? It's kind of ambiguous, a little bit abstract. And it really has to boil down to the fact that they're fluent in a specific language, and we call it visual literacy. And when we look at those directors who we really admire, like Kubrick's, the Spielbergs, all those guys, they really understand this language. They're very fluent in the language of cinema, and that's what makes them a storyteller, as opposed to a writer who just writes dialogue. And it's about having a meta conversation. That's what the language of cinema is. It's telling a story in a subtle way. And what I'm going to teach you guys today is a lot of broad concepts that hopefully will help you develop your visual literacy, so you can start to understand this language and really go deeper with the stories that you're telling. So let's start with these images here. So when you look at these images, right, we have the Dark Knight on the left and a Harry Potter on the right. Immediately, right off the bat, without having seen these movies, you know what's happening in these shots, right? We understand the image on the left is about power, right? This is a powerful character. Something that happened within this scene that shows power, and it's from the camera angle, the way it's framed, all that stuff, the stuff that's happening in the background, all that conveys that. Likewise, on the right here with Harry Potter, we understand that this is a character who is in a weaker position, right? He's out of control. There's something happening within this shot which conveys that, right? Oh, it's about showing and not telling, right? Because when you're talking about making a movie, or you're talking about a story, it's about two things. It's about story and character, right? And when you're framing, you really need to think about that. Like in everything in movies and everything in filmmaking, ultimately it's about the story, it's about the character, right? And it has to be intentional. If there's one thing that I want to impress on everyone listening today, it's that be intentional with everything you're doing. What do you choose to show the audience? What do you choose not to show the audience, right? Sometimes what you don't show is really important, right? And great filmmaking is about this, right? Great filmmakers think about this. And if you watch your favorite filmmakers and you analyze it based on what I'm going to talk about today, you're really going to start to see, genius behind their work, really, and why they are, considered auteurs, and why they are considered, great filmmakers. So it's like good writing. Good writing is subtle. It hints at something deeper. Anything in the process of filmmaking ultimately is subtle, right? You don't ever want to explain to your audience. You don't ever want to, use exposition. You don't want to you don't want to consider the audience dumb, right? The audience wants to be surprised. They want to be engaged. They want to discover, and they don't want to be told something. So like good writing, like anything that's good, it's subtle. It hints at something deeper. So I'm going to talk today, again, try to talk a little bit about the grammar. Sorry, getting some water. So, we talk about the grammar of cinema, and these are the wide shots, the medium close-ups, all that stuff. So we'll talk first about wide shots, and this is kind of a very basic overview of the basic shots that you should use in your filmmaking, in your shot list and whatnot. So wide shots kind of break down into a certain number of categories. The first wide shot is really an establishing shot, and this is typically an extreme wide shot. It shows, introduces a location, it introduces a time and place, so the audience gets a sense of where we are, right? So again, in Blade Runner, we see future Los Angeles. The first shot in the movie, we understand this is a new world. This is a very fantastic world, a bizarre world, and something interesting is going to happen in the story. Ridley Scott's taking us on a journey here. In No Country for Old Men, the Coen brothers emphasized the vast plains of Texas where the story takes place, right? This is one of the first shots in the movie as well. Very often you'll see this in the beginning of a movie to give a sense, or the beginning of a sequence to kind of show where we are. It really helps orient the audience. And again, you can kind of consider wide shots to be, the purpose of them is to orient the audience. Where are we, right? A long shot is a type of wide shot that would be used basically to show the character within their environment, right? So in the case of There Will Be Blood, Daniel Day-Lewis's character is looking at the flames that are burning in front of him. This is the first time you've seen this movie, you understand the importance of this shot. This is basically the beginning of his he's finally struck rich, right? He's found the oil that he's been looking for, and the fire of desire is burning within him. You know, and you can interpret this in a lot of ways, but that's kind of the cursory, you know, overview of what the shot means. And he's looking at it, right? So, you know, it really is an interesting shot, but Paul Thomas Anderson framed it in a wide, right? So we see the entire space. We understand everything that's happening. And there's a lot of stuff happening. We have his men trying to put out the fire, the flame, the height of the flame is emphasized, and his relationship to the flame, right? All of that's done in a wide. Which is very intentional and important to tell that story. Master shots is a type of wide used primarily in a sequence. So you would use a master shot it's a long shot, right? We have the characters in the environment, and we have them, you know, in relation to their environment and the relationship to other characters within the scene. And it's typically used to establish you know, where we are, right? It's orienting the audience. We know who's looking at who, you know, who's framed where are we, what's happening, and then typically in a sequence you would move tight. So in American Beauty, for example, we know that we are at a dinner scene. We understand the relationship between the wife and the husband, right? They're at opposite ends. We understand that there's something deeper going on there. We, you know, the relationship with the daughter, you know, stuck in the middle, right? There's something deeper hinting there. It's not said, it's hinted. And, you know, again, the director moved in. So, you know, we started wide, then we moved in, we got her close-ups, we got his close-ups, we got her reaction, we got inserts. And this scene will typically play out in its entirety. You will typically in a shot list, when you're filming, you will shoot this from start to finish, and then you'll move in, shoot close-ups and whatnot. Again, quick recap of wide shots. The purpose again is to orient the audience, right? Where are we? Character in relationship to his environment. It's useful, very useful for full body action scenes or musicals, comedies, stuff like that, where you really want to see the body, you really want to see everything that's happening in the environment. And master shots are really useful for, you know, again, establishing orientation of characters, but also in an edit, they can be called what's called a visual breather. There's something that you can cut back to, so, you know, give the audience a sense to breathe. It's like, okay, we're tight and now we're moving back to a wide. So we get that sense of where we are. We get a break from the emotional impact of that close-up. Close-ups. So this is a typical a close-up basically. So I guess to kind of go back in history a little bit. Sorry, drinking some water. Go back in history a little bit. The close-up was really kind of for the first time the I would argue the birth of narrative cinema, right? So back in the day, so the theater was the dominant form of storytelling as well as writing, movies came out of that. The acting came out of that. All this narrative story elements came out of theater, and so there was a grandiosity to the performance. So actors emphasize emotion in a very overt way, right? They didn't have sound systems in theaters, so obviously they had to, you know, project and overtly act, which is, you know, considered comical today. So But that was, the limitations of the technology. And so for most silent films, it was wides. That's pretty much all you had. And the origin of the close-up was really a practicality, right? So if we can't see something, we move it, and but it wasn't to emphasize story. It wasn't done intentionally to tell something deeper, to kind of get into the emotional headspace, the character, and really say something without saying something, if that makes sense. But it wasn't until directors like D.W. Griffith who kind of pioneered that idea of a narrative use of the close-up, where we went tight to the actor because there's something that's being said in their face that we want to emphasize. There's something that we want to show without telling the audience. And that's really how filmmaking kind of broke away from theater and became its own thing. And again, just like in wides, there's different categories of close-ups. The standard is the medium close-up. This is really where you frame a character from its chest up or waist up. And it's kind of a personal frame, right? It feels natural. It's typically shot with a 50 mil lens, which is considered a natural. Then the human eye is considered somewhat in that range between 50 and 60. And that's a natural personal space. So typically see this in dialogue sequences where we're there, we're with them, we're talking, we're with George Clooney here in his environment. We're standing next to him, right? We're with him wherever he is. Same in True Grit, right? We're there, with the character in his environment there. Again, typically using dialogue back and forth, pretty standard shot. Close up, again, highlight important details, used to really get into the emotional headspace, right? You use the close up because there's something important that you want to emphasize. You don't just willy-nilly use close ups. It's intentional. It's important. There's something you want to highlight. Manchurian Candidate, where we understand there's something important happening within his head right now. He's very distraught. Same with The Shining. Obviously, Jack Nicholson's character is insane. So there's insanity. We want to emphasize that. In this moment, Kubrick used it, just to highlight that, he says, "Here's Johnny." That's a very important line. It's classic. It's timeless. We recognize that. And, the entire scene wasn't filmed in a close-up, but just that moment. He hit at that right moment with a close-up. Extreme close-ups. Again, it's used sparingly. You wouldn't necessarily do the entire thing extreme close-up, but that's used to emphasize. It's used to really emphasize something important. In The Gray, Liam Neeson's character is about to face off with wolves, right? So, it cut back between his eyes and the wolves' eyes, kind of that classic standoff shot. Very tense moment, emphasizing the eyes and what's happening in the scene. Blade Runner, classic shot, extreme close-up of the eye, skyline, the lights of future Los Angeles, really kind of tells the story of AI and, what it means to be human, and kind of tells that, with that one shot. And it's very important for the story. So, again, intensify. You use it to really intensify a sequence. Again, recapping, again, it's an underline. It's something that you want to highlight. You should avoid using close-ups and ECUs too much because, again, if everything's important, then nothing's important. David Fincher had a great quote, every time you cut to a close-up, you're telling the audience that this is important, that you need to pay attention to this. And that's, a very good quote. So again, in a sequence, you wouldn't, the whole thing, with close-ups, you really just need to be mindful of what you're doing when you're using them. All right, so let's go into composition. So composition, let's begin with something called the rule of thirds, or the golden ratio, right? So the rule of thirds is basically a mathematical formula, right? It was discovered back in ancient Greek times, and it's essentially it's just math, right? It's a formula that explains the most visually pleasing image possible. It's like a naturally pleasing image. It's a lot deeper than that. You can kind of research it yourself, but basically It applies to architecture, it applies to design, it applies to music. And there's some evidence that it, occurs naturally in nature, but it's basically, in terms of photography and composition, you'll typically take a standard 16:9 image and you'll break it up into thirds, right? And placing a subject at these intersecting points here tends to produce a more visually pleasing image. Tends to produce something that's just pleasing to the eye, and just kind of you know I guess like, to frame it, it's a good starting point, right? It's not necessarily something that you would use all the time, but it's certainly helpful if you want to say, I just need to create something that's going to be visually pleasing. I'm going to create something that's going to work. Using that rule of thirds kind of helps you. But like everything, right? So it's a rule, but it's about knowing when to break the rule, right? So if you learn the rule, you know the rule, then you can do something more advanced, right? You can do the alter thing, right? You can break the rule, and you can know when to break the rule, and that's really important. Because again, if you don't know the rules, then how are you supposed to know how to break the rules? And sometimes breaking the rule is where the interesting filmmaking starts to happen. I'll take a quick break here. So a couple of classic examples of the standard use of the rule of thirds in cinematography. We have Zombieland on the left, and you can see how the characters are framed. On the third, we have a two-shot here of both characters in a car. And the director or cinematographer placed them in this visually pleasing area of the frame, right? You can kind of see how it works in a composition. Likewise in 7, classic example, it's slightly off the third, but the frame is a little bit off, but basically he's on the third. And this would be a classic two-shot dialogue, right? So the character's on the third, the other character would be on the opposite third, and it would be basically a visually pleasing image. It orients the audience. We understand what's happening. It makes sense, right? And likewise, if you want to break the rule, right? So here's an example of a great, DP and director in a great show that does that, right? Mr. Robot. If you've seen it, you understand, it's a very surreal show. It's a very, conspiratorial show. There's a lot of big government conspiracy type stuff happening, and it's surreal. It's very kind of bizarre, abstract. And the DP and director did a really good job here of breaking that rule, right? So as you can see, the characters are kind of framed in bizarre places on the frame, right? We have the third, and they're very much off the third. And it looks like the director or DP was drunk when they were filming this, but again, it's very intentional. They did this on purpose, right? And if you see the show, you understand that it's about big conspiracies and things like that. So you can kind of deduce just from not even having seen the show, you can kind of see that there's these frames make you uncomfortable, right? There's an unease about this sequence. The fact that they're framed so bizarre, it just makes you feel kind of bizarre. It makes you feel right. There's something not right happening here. They're emphasizing the environment, right? We're emphasizing the negative space here, like the office space, like big corporate boardrooms, right? That's important, and that's a dominant thing. It's almost like corporate power is dominant in the frame, right? They use it very well, and they use it a lot. There's a lot of other sequences in the show. I highly recommend you guys watching it, but where they bend the rules on the composition, and they do it very intentionally because they understand the rules, and they understand that breaking the rules can do opposite things and create different reactions in the audience. Very well done. So going a little bit deeper, so let's talk about lead room, right? So when you're framing a shot, lead room essentially is the look space, right? It's where the character is looking. So if they're looking left, or right, you're framing them on the opposite third, and it just creates a natural, kind of way for to orient characters and to kind of frame them, right? So Harrison Ford in Blade Runner, he's looking off the left, right? He's kind of looking, you know, we know where he's looking because we're going to cut to the opposite frame where we see the other character that he's looking at, right? And the lead room is the space in front. And you know, it's basically again, it's a natural frame. It's pleasing. It makes sense, and it doesn't confuse, which is, you know, very important. The opposite though is reverse lead room. So this is again, you know, kind of turning it on its head, and where more space is given to the objects and area behind the characters or overhead of the characters. Typically, it's used to create an uncomfortable feeling. There's something not right or not natural about this frame. It highlights something that's very important in the audience, or sorry, in the environment. So in the case of the King's Speech, you know, the door is very clearly highlighted. The door is very clearly emphasized, and they, you know, but the question is, why is that door highly emphasized? And again, that goes back to the subtlety. It's like, it's not said, but there's something that's happening in the dialogue, in the character, in the moment where that door is important. You know, again, the light is on, the door is clearly illuminated. You know, it's very intentional. They wanted you to notice this. Likewise, in the Social Network, the background here is highlighted, right? The office space. And if you've all seen this movie, you understand this is an important scene and sequence in the movie. Mark Zuckerberg's character, you know, Jesse Eisenberg's character, receives a phone call, which kind of, you know, is a tense phone call. It's very important for the story. And David Fincher intentionally framed the character this way to emphasize the office, because at the moment previous to this, the light was on, and as soon as he hears that bad news, the light turns off. And it kind of, you know, again, emphasizes that things have changed. Things are now going in a different direction. So, you know, it's kind of an interesting way to do that. But reverse lead room is really how you do that. So they're looking this way, but the background is emphasized, as opposed to the other way where the foreground is emphasized. Balance in frame. This is a framing technique, pretty obvious, pretty straightforward. You have static balance and dynamic balance. You know, one is calm, stable. One is a much more obvious high energy, unstable, much more chaotic. And again, going back to, you know, the idea of subtlety and kind of how images can tell a story by themselves, we can see what's happening. I mean, without even knowing the story or having seen the movie, we understand that, you know, this is a calm frame. This is a balanced frame. This is stable. The environment here is stable. The environment here is unstable. I mean, besides the character's obvious angry face, we understand a tilted frame subconsciously is a chaotic frame. It's an unstable frame, right? It's a lot of energy happening here. This is also typically called a Dutch angle. I've also heard it called going to Amsterdam. So it's kind of like, you know, this idea of you know, just, I mean, you really don't see it too much anymore. Unfortunately, it was a big trend back in the late 80s and 90s where they kind of tilted the frame a lot more. You don't really see it too much anymore, but it's you know, if you find an opportunity to use it, I highly suggest you do. But it's you know, again, just creating that energy, creating that emotion for the audience without having to say anything. Linear perspective. So this is a classic photographic framing technique, but essentially uses natural lines to create depth in an image. All objects look progressively smaller the further away they are. This is just a naturally occurring you know, phenomenon. And parallel lines, they converge in the distance over a horizon line towards a vanishing point. And a classic image or example of that would be kind of railroad lines or a road, right, where lines are just kind of moving off into the distance towards a vanishing point. That's kind of like the science behind it or what it is, but you know, you can kind of see two examples of it being used in an actual, you know, cinema, an actual movie. Stanley Kubrick used linear perspective, or you know, a type of linear perspective called one-point perspective, but nonetheless linear perspective, He used it very often. It was kind of his technique. He used it a lot. And if you watch any of his movies, you'll see it used almost exclusively in many sequences. But we see here in The Shining, there's some interesting stuff happening. So the linear perspective, right, is the lines converging of the hallway. We see these natural lines moving towards a vanishing point in the horizon. They're converging towards this point. And he framed the camera almost in the child's perspective. We're low, in frame. We're not quite at eye level. We're a little bit lower in frame. He's the character in relation to his environment, right? This is a wide shot. It's an establishing shot. This is the beginning of a sequence. And we see this as being foreboding. It's a scary environment. It's imposing, right? There's nothing in the frame inherent that suggests it's scary, but it is scary. It just looks terrifying. It's like, it's big, it's imposing, it's empty. There's something about it, sterile. There's something about it that just makes it look very creepy, very unnerving. The fact that the camera is positioned dead center makes emphasizes that point. And these lines that converge straight out into the distance, emphasizing that long hallway, right? Converging to this door, which is also important in the story. Is very, very well done. And you'll see this a lot in his movies. Children of Men, another example of using this idea of linear perspective to emphasize background, using natural lines to kind of, orient the audience to look at something, to pay attention to something. This is a wide shot, but you can't help but notice the building in the center, right? Which is, again, in this moment in the story, is very important. The main character is traveling to this building for a very important purpose that leads the story forward. The audience is naturally moving towards this building. It's emphasized. This is important. So again, like close-ups, it's used to, force you to pay attention to something, right? There's always something that a director, a good filmmaker is doing to get you to pay attention to highlight that this is important. Object framing. This is a little bit more of an advanced technique, but I wanted to briefly go over it. Basically, it's where essentially, if you orient objects and subjects in a frame in a naturally occurring shape, it's much more visually pleasing for an audience member. They will understand what's happening in the scene much better if you orient things in naturally occurring shapes. And you can get deeper with it in terms of a story perspective. As example, Breaking Bad. We understand as an audience member very instantly, without having seen the movie, without having seen or the show, we understand the character in relation to other characters and his environment. It's a triangle, right? Walt, the main character, is emphasized, suggesting that he's dominant, he's the leader, right? The two characters in the background are on the same level. They're on the same third, or the opposite thirds, but they're on the same plane, suggesting that they are subordinate, that they're lower in position. They're lower in the hierarchy, right? And this is a very important moment in the show. But again, without having seen anything, the object, right, the framing of the objects in the shot suggests this very notion of that. Pulp Fiction, this their position naturally forms a rectangle, right? So it's a visually pleasing object. I mean, you can get deeper with this and talk about their relationship, which is true. There is something going on here to suggest a relationship in relation to the rectangle, but by and large, it's really just something that is like, it basically is, looks natural. It's easy to understand, essentially. Okay, so this is a concept called magnetism of the frame. Again, a little bit deeper of a topic, but it's pretty important to kind of, understand when you're talking about, positioning characters within a shot. So we have something called magnetism of the frame. It's basically what it is the edges of a frame act like magnets, right? They attract or they repel objects. And they either attract towards them or they repel, right? So in the case of Step Brothers, in this example here on the left, the director decided to orient or emphasize the two characters on either side of the frame, right? And this is a moment in the story where they first meet. They're positioned on opposite sides because there's a tension happening. They don't like each other. They're positioned here. There's a pushing and a pulling happening here because of that. He could have positioned them closer, but that would have been a different mood. That would have told something different. Likewise in Silence of the Lambs, right? The position of Hannibal Lecter in the center of the frame. When you position someone in the center of the frame, or the center of the frame acts as a neutralizing force, right? Whereas the sides of the frame attract and repel. The center of the frame is neutralizing, right? However, when you compose someone and in a close-up such as this, in the center, it expands the frame. So what's happening here is that because we're so close on Hannibal Lecter's face, it looks like it's going to burst out of the frame. It's going to release from its confinement and expand outward infinitely. That's terrifying because he's a terrifying person. And the fact that the director framed him this way is extremely unnerving because his face is filling the frame. It's expanding outward. It's almost like it's coming towards you. So that's just another idea of, when you're framing someone, to kind of take that into consideration because you might do something really interesting. Okay, so this is, I just want to go over a couple examples of case studies. So, this is an example in control. And he did this in a very interesting way, which is not overtly obvious, and unless you break it down. So I want to kind of explain this real quick. So first off, we're in a medium close-up, right? And again, if we go back to what we talked about, a medium close-up is a personal shot, right? It's the shot where you're with the character. So we're with the Joker right now, right? We're in a medium close-up. The camera is looking up. Obviously, a classic way to frame someone, if you want to show power, is to frame, have the camera low and shooting upwards. The frame is also balanced, which does suggest that the character is in control, right? We went over dynamic versus static. This is a static frame. The character is in control. He's calm, even though outside this is a very chaotic scene with fighting going on. He's in control, right? There are vertical lines behind him, which is very interesting from a composition standpoint, because vertical lines, if you look at a church, for example, vertical lines are columns. You go to church, you see these vast columns moving upwards, right? Suggesting the power of God, right? The power of this holy presence within this space. Vertical lines intensify power. It's a natural, it's just a phenomenon. If you position someone with vertical lines behind them, it will look more powerful. It will look more, you will have a more powerful presence. And again, if you look at architecture, you see that, especially in churches. So very interesting to study. 12 Monkeys. This is another case study. We'll talk about how they created tension in a shot in a very interesting way. So if you haven't seen this movie, I highly recommend it. It's very good. Basically, in this scene, Bruce Willis's character is in a mental hospital out of his own free will. He's come from the future. They think he's crazy. He's all drugged up. So it's a very disorienting environment. It's a very disorienting sequence. And Brad Pitt is a very important character in that he meets within this mental hospital here. So first off, we are a medium close-up. Again, we're with the characters. We're in this space. It's unbalanced. This is the dynamic balance, right? It's not static. The camera is tilted. It's kind of we're off balance a little bit. We have these vanishing lines. It's not quite a linear perspective, but it's somewhat, right? This is a wide angle lens, and the naturally occurring lines on the wall point to Brad Pitt, right? He's emphasized not only by the position of the camera, but also the lines of the wall, which are drawing the viewer within to him. Because again, he's important. He's an important character, which we need to pay attention to. The magnetism of the frame, right? The position of Brad Pitt. He is emphasized. He's looming over Brad Pitt. He's a very intimidating presence. There's a tension happening between the Brad Pitt and Bruce Willis. He's an intimidating, looming presence, and the fact that he's on the edge of the frame pulls away. Right, there's a pull happening, which is emphasized. Very, very interesting movie with a lot of composition elements. I highly recommend you guys watch that. Whiplash, showing isolation, right? I think Damien Chazelle did a really good job of showing the isolated, intense nature of the character here. So first off, we're framed in a wide shot. This is an establishing shot, the first shot of the movie. We're looking down a hallway. We have these naturally occurring vanishing lines moving towards a horizon line, converging towards a horizon line to a vanishing point. He's the center of attention, right? This is emphasized, right? The vanishing lines move, emphasize the subject in frame. He's a little off center, right? He's not quite in center. He's a little off, which again, he's not perfect. And it's a very important theme of the story. It's that this idea of practicing, this idea of he's constantly sacrificing everything to be the best. And it kind of tells that a little bit. It hints at that. The vertical lines in the hallway, the naturally occurring vertical lines suggest an imposing environment. There's a powerful presence in this hallway. There's a powerful presence in this school that he's in, and it suggests with those vertical lines. Also that and we didn't really talk about this, but the idea that he's in a frame within a frame, right? And he's isolated from all else. And when you frame someone within this, it's a technique that's used really to convey isolation. A lot of things, but typically would use frame within a frame to convey the sense of isolation. He's separate from everything else. He's isolated, right? It's really kind of brilliant. It's emphasizing all that, and it's all done naturally. It looks natural, right? There's nothing that suggests that this was intentional, but it very much was, and that's the subtlety of great filmmaking. Let's talk about Get Out. So this is my last example here. So showing psychological fear. And I think this is one of the best examples I could find of this. I really love this shot in the sequence. So first off, we're at a close-up, right? And so, this is emphasized. There's something important happening here. The director has emphasized this moment to be very important. And obviously, if you've seen the movie, you understand why. The camera's at eye level, right? And it's important that it's at eye level. He's looking at the lens. He's looking right at you, right? And it's tense because first off, he's obviously in a great emotional distress. The camera is close on his face. He's looking at you, but the frame is also balanced, right? The fact that he's in this very, very tense emotional moment, the frame is balanced, and that he's looking at you. It's like opposites. It creates this extreme amount of of tension of it doesn't feel right. There's something not right here, right? And the fact that he's framed center, dead center, he's not, again, if we go back to the other example, we're talking about magnetism of a frame with the Hannibal Lecter example, the camera isn't that close. It's not uncomfortably close, right? He's dead center, but it's neutralizing. It's a neutralizing position, right? The tension is released because he's framed in this way. And the fact that he's going through this emotional distress, the camera's at eye level, and the frame is balanced, and he's in a neutralizing position of the frame, it creates this uncomfortable, vastly uncomfortable feeling than if the frame was, Dutched, and if the frame was in an extreme wide shot, fish-eyed or something like that. It would be a different scene, a different movie, right? And I already talked about that. But like if you've seen this movie, you understand why he's being hypnotized. He's deep in his head, right? He's stuck, and the audience member is also stuck because he's looking at you almost like he's crying out for help. and you can't help them. And it just makes this like really bizarre like feeling where it's like the tension is accentuated because of this, which I think was done brilliantly. Okay, so I know we talked about a lot, and I kind of breezed through things, but I want to make sure we hit our time. So let's talk about shot list. So let's take a quick drink of water here. So shot lists are really important when you're talking about working with a DP and you're talking about kind of organizing your production. I like to think about this idea of coverage, and I like to think of directing, thinking like an editor, right? I mean, I think that, well, first off, well, let's talk about coverage first. So coverage is really, when, if you're not familiar with the term, it basically it's referring to shooting a scene from a variety of different angles and distances, right? So that ultimately you have the raw material necessary to edit a scene together coherently, right? You know, you're capturing your wides, your mediums, your inserts, so that the editor can you know, kind of make a coherent scene and tell a story visually. And I really do think that great directing is great editing. I really think that all the great directors understand editing very much, and and if you know how to edit, I really do think that you're going to be an infinitely better director, because you're going to know what you're going to need to get, and you're going to understand the importance of coverage, and you're going to make editors very happy. So making sure that you have enough camera coverage will also ensure that you have options too. And I know that when Matt and I direct movies, and we storyboard things pretty extensively, and we capture coverage, we capture, you know, a lot of options, and often what we captured in the storyboard, or sorry, what we visualize in the storyboard won't necessarily translate to the edit, but because we had those options, we can twist things around and kind of, you know, emphasize something that we didn't think we wanted to emphasize before, and things can change in the edit, and if you have those options, your story will be a lot better and richer, because you'll have the ability to kind of change things if you need to. So typical process for a basic coverage is you start wide and then you move in. So you know, if you start with your master shot, establishing the characters and their environment, you then can move in for tights and stuff like that. And that's generally the process you want to follow. If there's a reason why you can't, because of lighting issues or character, you know, whatever, there's some reason why you can't, then, you know, that's obviously something you talk about with your DP to kind of plan that out, your sequence of events. But the general flow is master first, and then close-ups, extreme close-ups, and inserts last. And generally the DP will light for the master, and then you'll kind of move in and get coverage and change the lighting slightly. But a typical shot list will have a wide shot, medium, extreme close-ups, etc. You can also use the master shot as a rehearsal, right? Kind of basically just, you know, because you're not going to use your master shot the entire time, right? In the edit, you're just going to use it to cut back to establish all that stuff. So it doesn't have to be quote unquote perfect, right? The performance of the actors can be, you know, you can get a feel for how things are going to work, and then you can kind of move in and get the close-ups. But as long as you have that master to always cut back to, you know, that safety, so to speak, you know, you'll be fine. Again, emphasizing this, very important. And I know a lot of first-time directors kind of miss this point, but always let the scene play out in its entirety before moving on. You want to, just like your master, you let the master play out, and then you get your close-ups and medium close-ups and close-ups and extreme close-ups and stuff. You tend to want to let the action play out in its entirety as well, right? If you're especially in your mediums and your close-ups, your extreme close-ups you can get away with, you know, one-offs, and it's inserts, of course, you don't have to worry about that. But close-ups and medium close-ups, I really think you should get everything, just so you have it. Again, in your mind, you say, yeah, I'm not going to need it, but you might need it. You know, you just never know. It's about saving, you know, your ass later in the edit, really. Okay, so quickly, let's talk about the anatomy of a shot list. This is how you typically organize your shot list, right? So On the left here, we have an example screenplay that Matt and I wrote recently. And when you're talking about making a shot list, you break down the scenes by numbers. So you have, in this case, we have 3 scenes, 1, 2, 3, and then within the scene, if you have different shots, you do 1A, 1B, 2A, 2B, 2C, etc. Right? That way, in the slate, they have scene 1A, take 1, etc. And 1A will be your wide, 1B will be your close up, 1C will be your extreme, etc. And however many shots you have in your scene. This example here on the right is an actual shot list from a Budweiser commercial that's currently in pre-production. But basically, you can see like how they emphasize, this is how they organize it. It's very, very simple, right? And if you have different close-ups, then you can kind of organize it that way. And I always think, a philosophy that I like to have is really just, when you're preparing, you really want to have a very clear vision of what's happening, almost to the point where anyone could do it if you give them the right documents or whatever. Like you just want to be so prepared that you can explain it to anyone, that everyone gets it, everyone on set gets it, that everyone's on the same page, and that there's no confusion. Because the last thing you want is for people just to not know what's going on, and then that just creates chaos. So you want to be so prepared, right, that you've made this movie 100 times in your head before you even step on the set. I really think that's important. You need to have prepared, you need to have visualized it as best you can, working with your DP, working with everyone who helps you visualize it, and just get it on page before you even get on set. Because then at that point, production is really just a recipe, right? It's just following a recipe, which is a little bit of a it's not quite like that. Obviously, there's a lot of contingencies and things that come up, but that's basically the point. Is you want to be so prepared that you minimize those unknowns and you minimize the things that do happen from time to time. So pre-visualization is the key for that. And it's really important that, not everyone likes a storyboard, but I really suggest, especially for first-time filmmakers, is the storyboard, is to get it on page, get it visualized, work with your DP, get someone who knows how to draw and get it on page. However you do, it doesn't have to be a drawing or beautiful artwork, just something to give to someone that they can understand what's happening. Because it's so hard to interpret a screenplay. It's so hard to interpret what's happening in your head. But if you give someone a visual blueprint, then it really helps things out, and it saves you so much time and energy and headaches, and it helps you get a better product at the end of the day. A couple things. Shot Designer and CineTracer are 2 programs that I use from very, very good pre-visualization tools. I highly suggest taking a look at them. Another thing that Matt and I do for certain sequences when we're pre-planning is shooting the movie on your phone. Just getting a camera or a phone or GoPro, whatever, and going out to location, getting a couple friends or even the actors themselves, and just working through the sequence, right? And that's part of rehearsal, just working through it. And if you want to experiment, then now is the time to experiment, right? That's the time to experiment and just kind of get your shots and then go back, edit it together, see how it flows, see what you need to do to fix it, and then move on from there. I mean, that's what Matt and I did on our movie 1042 is we actually took Wes out and shot a lot of the sequences before we went on set, and it saved us a lot of time. And by and large, a lot of them didn't change, but some of them did change quite a bit from what we visualized, and that's because we had that we did that before, and we edited it together, and we realized that it wasn't going to work, and that we needed to think about it differently, and it saved us a lot of time. So a couple of resources. Studio Binder is a good pre-production resource for you guys to take a look at. Does call sheets, does shot list, very organized app. Creates it very organized, very visual. Helps people. Again, the more visual you can make it, the better off people are going to be. Shot Designer is another one. Again, it's kind of it does almost like maps out a shot, and you can put cameras creates very simple to easy to understand diagrams where, you can kind of say, oh, camera's going to be here, 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 here. And you can kind of, give that to your DP, and it's going to be easier to understand. CineTracer is a great cinematography simulator. You can basically recreate environments and actually get real world lighting situations and stuff like that too. It's a lot more time intensive, but I use it a lot just to previs because it really helps, get a sense on what's happening. Again, always consult with your DP before, while you're doing this so that you guys are all on the same page, and your DP's job is to help you visualize your movie. So very important to involve them. Here's a couple of examples of stuff that Matt and I have done. This is for a movie that was unproduced, but this is a standard. We actually hired someone, a freelancer on Upwork.com to kind of, draw something for us. And they did a pretty good job, a very good job actually of pre-visualizing it. We gave them a sketch, kind of with stick figures. We walked them through it. And then again, of course, the script. And then they kind of took it from there, and it turned out exactly how we envisioned it in our heads. And this is CineTracer. This is for our movie Vaporwave, and we use this again. CineTracer. You can see like how the lighting. You can actually control the lighting. It looks like Barbie doll stuff, but it's a little goofy. But it works. I mean, it really helped us like a lot when we were on set, because and it helped our DP and everyone on set to really get a picture on the end product, so they could really help us, bring it to life. Shot designer this is how it looks, and again, very easy to understand. Camera moves, you can animate this too, which is interesting. So you can have the characters move, and it just makes everything a lot easier. So, yeah. So I know I rushed through stuff. This is it. This is the end. Q&A time. If you guys have any questions, let me know, and I'll try to answer them.
Hello. So my question is, I know that different directors have different ways of visualizing. How many, and I get that you really like those programs, and believe me, those are beautiful, yeah, gorgeous. But as an actual working DP on different films, what sort of different ways have directors shared their vision with you?
Well, I mean, I guess there's no standard way, but I guess like the typical way would be, just having a conversation. And really, I mean, in a professional environment, the DP and director are very close. Like they basically work together in the pre-production phase from day one. You know what I mean? Like he's involved, the DP is involved in everything. They're working together, they're watching movies together. They're basically best friends. You know what I mean? Like they're with each other for the entirety of pre-production. Again, when you're talking about a Hollywood movie and making millions of dollars, it's easier said than done. But that's if you really want to. And again, like some directors are more visual, some are not, and that's where a DP's strength comes in. The DP should be very visual. That's the purpose of the DP. So they are basically there to help the director visualize the story. So if you're very visual as a director, you may not necessarily need to work with the DP as much. You may be able to visualize it yourself, and maybe the DP is more of a technical person, right? And that's a lot of roles for a lot of DP or directors. And then other times the director is more of a actor director or whatever, and they're more of a writer or something, and they don't really know how to visualize. They really need to work closely with the DP, and that's where the DP will be involved very much in the storyboarding and very much in the shot list, and they'll have those conversations, and the director will say, well, I want this mood, and I really like, and a lot of times, like Chris Nolan, for example, uses paintings. He uses famous paintings as like examples of shots that he wants to convey, and then he leaves it to his DPs to kind of figure out the rest, and then they kind of so it in a certain sense that's kind of how it works. So it's I guess a standard approach would be like a director will give the framework, and they'll have those extensive conversations, those backs and forths. They'll develop the lookbooks, they'll have inspirations like paintings or movies or even music, whatever is like inspiring, and they'll just basically come up with the visual look and feel together. you know, and that's really it. But again, certain directors don't need those conversations as much. They have a very strong image in mind. So yeah. But
What was the most unorthodox method that a director gave that communicated? The weirdest.
The weirdest? I don't know, man. I don't know if there's any of the weird. I guess like to me the weirdest was like music. Like I think that's like probably the most bizarre. I think there's like certain DPs and directors who like listen to music, and you know what I mean. That's kind of very interesting. I think that the painting is probably
that is weird,
but it makes sense though. I mean, if you look at Dark Knight, for example, like some of the shots, there actually are like from famous paintings, like the Joker in jail. You know what I mean? Like that famous shot of him just looking off camera. It's like there's actually a painting, a famous painting which like resembles that pretty extensively. I mean, there's actually many shots in that movie that resemble painting.
Sorry. Okay, I did not. That is very cool.
Yeah. Oh wait, I think Matt had something to say. What did you say, Matt?
Yeah.
Oh, well, just to kind of point out, you know, with all of us, like at our levels, like when we're working with a DP, unless we're paying them thousands of dollars or something, yeah, unless you're like paying them thousands of dollars, like they may not have the time to do the pre-visualization. So I would say, like, just for everybody, like the best thing you could do is just to come up with any possible way to visualize it, whether it's just going to a location, taking pictures, having a lookbook, ideally using like Shot Designer or something like that, or stick figures. Just because, you know, again, like having to, like, yeah, you have to rely on the DP if you don't know exactly what you're doing, but you also want to respect their time as well, because they just, you know, you're not paying them a whole lot of money. Ideally, you're getting them for free anyway. But
yeah, I think, you know, great directing. I mean, you can't really be a director if you don't know how to visualize. Like, honestly, like you really shouldn't. I don't know. I mean, it's a skill you really need to develop. If you're not naturally a visual person, you got to develop those skills, because, again, filmmaking is a visual medium, right? It's visual, and it's like you really need to understand, like photographic techniques. I mean, you don't have to be an expert, but you really should have an understanding of what makes a good image, why you're doing that, and how your movie is going to play out. You know what I mean? The best directors that I've seen, and that, you know, the ones that we all know, they're amazing visualizers. They can just they know, and it really goes with anything too, like business, anyone. If you have a good vision for something and you can explain it to someone, you know, you're much better off. And yeah.
Dick had a question, I believe.
First of all, congratulations on this wonderful tutorial and lesson. I appreciate it. I picked up a lot of stuff that I hadn't known before. But there is one, and maybe we're bridging into a more advanced work, and I apologize for this question in advance. But there are situations, and I think even on one of our films, that where you have a close-up of two people, and one has to be out of focus and the other one is in focus, and the technique of knowing when to pull focus on that. Maybe you could touch on that a little bit.
Yeah, sure. I mean, that's called you know, shallow focus, deep focus, or depth of field, and that's, you know, again, it's a you know, aesthetic concept, where basically, you know, using the aperture of the lens to kind of, you know, either let more light in or you know, decrease the amount of light. So I guess in the case of, you know, I guess it's a classic example of what's that movie called? I'm blanking on the name. It's
Citizen Kane.
Yeah, Citizen. Thank you, Matt. Yeah, so this is the classic example of Citizen Kane. There's a sequence where the director basically had the camera move, you know, from one location, which is a window with a child playing in the snow, and he moved back to a dialogue sequence happening, and in the background you still see the child playing, very much in focus. So everything's in focus. That's called deep focus, where you don't see it too much anymore. which is unfortunate, but he did that intentionally because he wanted to, make sure that that the audience still saw the child in the background, because that was an important story element, right? And if you've seen the movie, you understand that that's like his childhood, right? That's his, like the last time that he was, able to be free, you know what I mean, playing in the snow innocently before he became who he was. And they wanted to emphasize that because it was a very stark contrast to what was happening in the dialogue between the parents. So that if he did that where it was everything was blurry in the background, that would have been, you would have lost that, right? That subtlety would have been lost. So that's a very good example, a classic example of using, when to use focus and when not to use, when to use deep focus and when not, when to use shallow focus and when not to. In the case of using what's known as shallow focus, which is where one character is blurry, the other is not, that is used now just as a general rule, as like a pretty image. And I think that's wrong because, again, going back to the purpose of cinema, it's like its own story. So that would be a reason. So it's like, why is someone blurry? Why is someone in focus? Right. And I've seen movies recently on Netflix and stuff where they just did it because, you know what I mean? And it's so obvious if you understand the concept. It's like, okay, well, that's stupid. Like, why are you doing that? You know what I mean? It's because it's a pretty image or whatever. That's not good enough. You know what I mean? There has to be a reason why. So I don't know if that answers your question, but yeah.
Very good illustration.
Fight scenes, like some of the best, action movies actually use, not just, a good mix of stable cameras, but also, dynamic kind of moving cameras too. So, like if you watch like old martial arts movies, it's not, a lot of it is stable. You know what I mean? A lot of Jackie Chan stuff, it's all like, wides. It's all wide, and a lot of it's wide, and it's not. A lot of it is not, moving camera, and it just creates, again, just like you said, it can disorient the audience too much to the point where they just lose their orientation. They don't know where they are. So good action sequences will have a mix of it. Maybe you'll start with that shaky, and then you'll cut to a wide, and it's still, and you see them moving. You know what I mean? And then you go back to the action, and you're shaky. So, but you need that breather, and sometimes they don't do that. And if you don't have that breather, if you don't have that, okay, I need to take a step out and see what's happening. You know what I mean? If you don't have that, then it just can cause like confusion and disorient the audience, which is not good. So that sounds like that's what exactly happened to you when you're watching that show.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. So just probably other people do. Yeah, I mean, a lot of other people, and I've seen it too. I mean, if you watch like Saving Private Ryan is a good example of it done well. It's like, okay, the beginning is obviously like that, but then he doesn't use it all the time. It's like he does cut to those moments where it's still, you know what I mean? And it's very important that as a director you have that, because otherwise you're just gonna cause too much disorientation.
Yeah, for a while they were using a lot of Steadicam on the shows. And on the close-ups, the camera was moving. So the person was constantly moving. It was very disorienting.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. And that's bad directing, honestly. It is. It's bad directing. It's like they probably didn't even capture that. And that's not good, especially for something like that. So yeah, but I do see that a lot. It's a big trend now, actually, in a lot of shows and movies where it's just all just moving and there's no reason for it. It's just, yeah.
A good balance for that, then, I think, probably is where, if you want to employ some of that, is in your storyboarding and directional camera moves to convey to the cinematographer. Is that something that can be penciled into the script? What do you call it? Storyboard scripting tablet.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, for sure. Like you would, you would definitely pencil that in. I mean, that's, if you're doing a fight sequence or something action heavy, you would, that's really where storyboarding is important. I mean, if you're doing an action sequence, you need to storyboard it because you need to be able to understand the big picture of what you're capturing and then kind of go in there and capture that. That would be a definitely.
I would meant was also the shot list.
Oh yeah, for sure.
Sort of reflected in that.
Yeah, for sure. And that's a conversation with the DP and camera off and all that stuff. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, for sure.
I have a quick one. It's actually more something that Charm City does often. So a lot of the times when we do the medium, when we do 2 medium opposing shots in a dialogue, usually one is done dirty, that is softly out of focus on one character's shoulder. I was wondering if you could just sort of explain that a little bit, and then your opinion on when it's a good thing to use and when it's not a good thing to use, narratively.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think that personally, I think that's kind of a personal choice. I don't necessarily think. I mean, again, it's, I guess, like from a story perspective, it depends on the story. It depends on your personal style. Like, again, like if you go to the Coen brothers, Roger Deakins, all of his mediums in a dialogue sequence, he never does over the shoulder just because he doesn't like them. It's not really an intention. You know what I mean? It's like he likes to be. He frames the camera so you're in there with them. You know what I mean? So if you look at those examples of like No Country for Old Men or whatever, every dialogue scene, the camera is like, in the orientation of where the other character would be that he's speaking to, but the camera's there and it's like, it's positioned so it's chest up. And it's a very, very much like every shot he does is like that, every dialogue shot. But again, that's a personal preference for him and the Coen brothers because they want to be, they want to show that, or sorry, they want to direct the audience to kind of join the character in that conversation, basically. Because again, if you frame someone over the shoulder, you're kind of like an over, it kind of is like a little bit of a peeping Tom position, like you're kind of just like eavesdropping. You know what I mean? You're not quite in there. You know what I mean? So it's like that could work if you want to emphasize that, but it's like I don't know. To me, I definitely prefer the other one. I think I guess like from having studied this and watched some of the movies, I'm like I can see why he does that, and I think that makes a lot more sense from like a story perspective or like a cinema perspective. But like the over the shoulder shot, can look more visually pleasing in some cases, but it also could tell a different story. It could lead the audience to feel differently about what's happening between the two characters, even if it's very subtle and it's not necessarily emphasized.
If I can add on to that, I've seen an extremely dirty shot where like maybe the character that you're over the shoulder of, if their shoulder's taking up like 2/3 of the screen, it's squeezing the character that's talking right now, and it's more of a power move.
Yeah.
Or it can be used to show power over a certain character if the person talking is very tiny, and the shoulder is overwhelming them in the scene.
Yeah, absolutely, totally agree. Yeah, and you see that a lot in exactly, like the dynamics of the character for sure. Anytime you emphasize something, it's like this is important, and it's certainly in a dialogue scene you'll see like the looming presence of something suggest even subconsciously that this is an intimidating presence, or it's something that's larger in frame, can come off as aggressive. Yeah. Yeah.
Excellent. Okay. Do we have any other?
I think there was one other question on.
This is Ted. I had a quick one about, I know what a shot list is. I know what a storyboard is. I've heard the lookbook referred to several times. I mean, how does that fit into, how can that fit into, how can a lookbook fit into that communication of framing the shots?
Yeah, well, so I guess a lookbook generally can be useful. in terms of you know, examples of other movies where, you know, you want this kind of composition, or, you know, you like the way, I guess like a lookbook in terms of is for a variety of things. It's for the entirety of the image, not just and look and feel of the movie. We're talking about things like lighting, things like color, things like the composition, even things like, you know, where objects are placed and stuff like that, orientation of objects. That's generally what you look at when you're designing a lookbook, and a DP is designing a lookbook. So, you know, they'll use it as a guide for specifically for lighting, I think, and color when it comes to the post-production process. And that's just helps you get an overall sense of a visual aesthetic. So hey, you want something that's like blue, or you want something that's more like warm, or something like that. And you know, here's an example of a commercial or a movie that did that really well. That kind of helps you know, the DP and production designer and everyone just kind of get a sense of, okay, so blue is a prominent theme here. This is something really we want to kind of highlight. You know, it's warm. This is a warm kind of setting. It's a warm shot. You know, again, it's not like a storyboard. Is more like, this is exactly what it is. You know what I mean? It's like, do this, you know, whereas a lookbook is more like a guide. It's like, okay, you give it to a production designer to kind of have a starting point, and it's kind of something to work off of.
Like a dreamy 16-year-old
Right.
planning out their wedding, their
Right.
perfect wedding.
Exactly. Yes, exactly. It's like Pinterest boards and stuff. It's like this is like, you know, the general idea of what we're looking at. Yeah.
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 Yeah, I guess it would be like probably more like used for like getting the tone of the piece, because like you can't really do that with storyboarding so much. As well as you can with like using examples of already completed work. So showing like picture images from previous movies and stuff like that that already have it gaffed, and you know, so you know that, okay, we want it to be creepy, but we want it to look this kind of creepy, rather than just, you know, hey, I want it to look scary and dark. So
Yeah, exactly. It gives a better idea. Very, very much so about lighting and color and stuff, and production design and all that stuff. Yeah.
What about, and this is a big subject, so anyhow, I'll understand if you want to observe it for something else later. Dolly shots and glide cams and rail shots, when to use those, how, or more particularly, when are they effective?
Well, I think a dolly is, you know, pretty effective for establishing shots. If you're establishing a scene, or, you know, or something like that. Glide cam, again, used for long takes. We didn't really talk about, you know, they're called oneers, you know what I mean, where, you know, a scene is playing out entirely in one shot. That's, you know, or a movie in some cases, and that's really a good reason to use a glide cam or a Steadicam or a, you know, Movi or something like that. And that would be, you know, why would you do that is again, it's about immersing the audience. Children of Men is a great example of a movie that does that very well, where a lot of the takes are one shot, and a lot of the battle scenes, particularly at the end, is one shot, and it's very immersive. You know, you kind of like are in there with the character, and you're moving from close to tights and wides and running with the character. It's shaky, and then it's still, and it really kind of, you know, does everything in one. The Revenant is another good example of a movie that does that. So that's like a good example where I use that. Dolly, I mean, again, I mean, you know, you might use a dolly, you know, if you wanted to do like the Hitchcock shot, which is the classic, you know, kind of, you know, you're basically using a telephoto to zoom in while you, or zoom out while you're zooming in, or sorry, zoom out while you're pushing in, basically. And that kind of creates the background is moving while it's very disorienting. It's an interesting shot, kind of cliched, but it really is cool to use, especially if you want to use it to kind of like highlight, like, you know, something important has just occurred, and it's a good transition shot. So yeah, I mean, that's really why you would use it. A dolly is more controlled, a lot more controlled than a glide cam or a steady cam. Tends to be easier to do and set up, and creates a it tends to create a smoother image. They're getting better now, but it does tend to create a smoother image, and it tends to create, you know, again, like if you need to use that, again, like a lens change while you're moving kind of thing, or a focal length change while you're moving, that's where a dolly would really come in. So yeah, I don't know if that answers your question or not, but
What's it called when they have the camera on a wire and they're running it down a wire and everything is done remotely?
That's, oh man,
What is that called?
They do that in football.
yeah, they do that in football. I'm forgetting the name of it, but it's like a wire cam, basically. There's a specific name for it, but yeah, basically it's a wire cam. Essentially, it's, you know, just a camera and a wire. That's, yeah, again, it's used for sports. You could use it like if you're in like the woods or something, you want to kind of like, again, it's all about like you might use it if you're like following a character, running or something like that. You could set it up, you know, from tree to tree kind of thing. But yeah, a dolly or a glide cam or steady cam would work probably better. But yeah,
there's an adjunct of that, maybe not an adjunct, but it's a separate device. So we used it once on, I think it was on Camille's show. I don't know if he actually edited it into it, but it was a camera mounted on a gimbal, which was mounted on rails. And we moved this way or that way to emphasize something. I wasn't sure. I think maybe you could touch on that just a bit.
So the camera was on a gimbal, and it was on the.
Well, that's just, yeah, it just happened to be on a gimbal. It didn't have to be.
Oh.
It was on horizontal rails,
and
we would move along the rail.
But was the gimbal detachable?
Oh, sure.
Oh, okay. Well, maybe. Yeah.
I think it was just there for other reasons for setup.
Okay.
When they needed to use it, but anyhow, it was just a pan shot on the rails.
Well, you might do that well, first off, he probably did it for practical reasons, so he didn't have to rebalance and set up everything, which takes time. But you could also do it if you wanted to do something more advanced, like maybe you could start, I don't know why you would do this, but you could start, you know, moving and then take it off the rails and kind of move with it, you know what I mean, to go further, you know. But at that point, I don't know why you wouldn't just, you know, hold it. But yeah, I don't know why he would do that, but I suspect it was probably just for, you know, time's sake.
Well, let's just divorce ourselves. Let's say it was fixed on a head on the rails. Why would you? What effect would that be? As you were maybe rolling it along and then zooming in on a character or something?
You could, yeah.
Does that add any dynamic?
Yeah, it's a more dynamic shot. I mean, I guess like if I'm understanding the shot, is he going from like a room and then he's panning to a character kind of thing?
Here, let me step in for a second. Basically, he put all the actors at one side of the room, and the dolly track was perpendicular, right, on the back side of the room, and he moved the camera back and forth. I guess what I would say is that Camille's style seems to favor a lot of dynamic shots. He likes to keep his camera moving. And I guess what I would ask, sort of tangent to that, is how do you feel about, you know, it does seem to be a modern trend where a lot of cameras are moving, even if just a little bit all the time. Do you like it all dynamic? Do you think, what are your thoughts?
Well, I think I tend to like still, I think, and personally, you know, I guess like when I was starting out, I really liked dynamic a lot more. But then I kind of, as you kind of learn more and you get more experience or whatever, you begin to appreciate the still camera, and you begin to appreciate the tripod, I guess, and why, I guess, like, if there's no, to me, I guess, like, if there's no reason to do it, then you shouldn't do it. You know what I mean? Like, having that dynamic shot in his movie, if there was a purpose for it, then that's great. If you wanted to create more high energy or whatever, then that's awesome. Then definitely, do that. But if there's no reason to do it, I just don't think there's a, why would you go through the trouble of, like, setting it up that way or whatever? You know what I mean? Like, I guess that's the point. Now if he was doing, like, something where he was moving, like, suppose he started close on, like, a picture frame or something like that, and then he moved out and then moved over to see the character coming out from a doorway or something, like, that would be a reason to do a dolly and to have it, you know what I mean? But if it's like an entire dialogue sequence just moving back and forth, I don't necessarily think there's, again, I don't know the story or his thinking, but I personally, just from what you guys said, it doesn't sound like there is a purpose other than it was just to create more of a dynamic shot or more of an interesting shot, which is good or bad. It all depends on personal preference. I will say that they do, when you do interviews, like an interview, a corporate interview or something, you do tend to see the second, if you have two camera angles, you will see the second angle moving back and forth. And that's a standard corporate shot. You know what I mean? That's kind of the wide shot, or the close up will be moving back and forth on, like, a dolly or like a motorized slider or something.
But you still couple that with
Exactly.
a medium close that's on a tripod, right?
Exactly. So you have the typical setup will be a tripod, medium, or close up, and then the side shot will be wide or close up, depending on the whatever's preference you have, and that might be moving. You know what I mean? It just, again, there's no purpose for it other than it's just, creates a more interesting visual, makes the interview more dynamic, makes it more easier to digest from if you're watching the interview, basically, versus, like, just a single static shot. But again, like, separating out the corporate world versus the cinema world, it's like, well, sometimes they don't really translate. You know what I mean? There's a big difference. Like, the corporate world is all about making it pretty. You know what I mean? If you're good, if you come from the cinema world, you might try to do something where you're emphasizing, but sometimes what's pretty isn't necessarily what works for the story. So the corporate world's all about making it pretty because they're paying big bucks and they want to make their CEO look good. Cinema is like, well, sometimes a shot needs to look bad because the story demands that. You know what I mean? Like, it's important that we're a little bit out of focus, or it's important that we're tilted. You know what I mean? Like, the camera angle's tilted. It's important that we're it's a basic background. You know what I mean? There's nothing interesting in the background because the character's house is uninteresting. You know what I mean? Like, that's important. Whereas in a corporate environment, you try to make it look as pretty as you can. And, I suspect, I know Camille does a lot of corporate stuff, so I suspect maybe that translated over a little, but I don't know. So, yeah.
I mean, I would say, like, the biggest thing with that is just, I think the reason why it was so hard to answer that about why did Camille do that is because, like, John doesn't have access to the script and the story. So, like, when you're designing your shots, it really just falls on two primary reasons: the story and the logistics in making the story, because obviously it's time sensitive and whatnot. You may not have the budget. So there are logistical concerns that may prohibit you from, like, doing this really cool shot that you're trying to do. But, like, overall, deciding whether or not to be dynamic in your shots or static or having a soft focus or deep focus, all of that hinges completely on just the story itself and what is it trying to convey, because that's really what it is. It's the meta conversation in the script, shown visually. So, yeah.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. It's again, it's like, if it boils down to anything, it's about the story. And I know it sounds cliched, but it is. It's like, why are you doing something? And that's it. It's at the end of the day, if you just think about why you're doing something, and then your movie's going to be a lot better and more interesting.